Hello, and welcome to Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, a podcast to facilitate connections and illuminate real solutions to common problems within the parking and mobility industry. I'm Brian Wolf, President and CEO of Parker Technology, and I'll be your host as we speak with parking professionals from across the industry at all levels to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks. Parking a car. With me on the show today is Walt Gray, Director of Parking and Transportation for George Bush Intercontinental Airport and Houston Hobby Airport obviously in Houston. Walt Gray is the Director of Parking and Transportation for not one, but two major airports in Houston, the George Bush Intercontinental Airport and Houston Hobby Airport. Walt was raised in Houston, attended Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas, and worked for Tom Gray Management Company, a franchised automobile dealership company, for 8 years. During that time, he also built an off-airport parking operation at George Bush Intercontinental Airport. It probably wasn't called that back then. We'll get to that. With an automotive repair shop. He sold that business 2.5 years later to All Right Parking and went to work for All Right. I don't want to give away all of his history because of what I'd like to do is let him tell it himself, but suffice it to say that All Right merged with another company, which merged with another company, which merged with yet another company. And through a couple of twists and turns that I hope Walt will get into when he shares his history with us, he landed with the city of Houston running two large and really important parking operations. Walt has worked at or studied more than 17 airports, including some of the largest airports in the country. I would say it's no leap that Walt is an expert at airport parking. And I hope over the course of the next hour, we all get a lesson or two or three about how to run a parking operation in such a large venue. Walt, welcome to Harder Than It Looks. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Brian. First
off, I just read an article that the two Houston airports set an all-time record for passengers. So you put 60.1 million passengers through those two airports in 2023, which again was a record. I'm guessing several of those folks had to park as well. So congratulations on an awesome milestone. I'm sure you probably felt that.
Absolutely, we do.
Yeah.
It's been crowded.
I just talked to someone else. I can't remember who I talked to yesterday. They said that their airport traffic is up 20% over 2019. Are those numbers pretty close to yours as well?
No, ours are not up that much over 2019. We're running about 3% over 2019.
Okay. All right. But you still set records, which means a lot more people are parking.
And because 2019 was a really good year.
Yeah. There you go. Okay. So what I like to do to set this up, the standard question is, how did you get into parking? And we got into a little bit of that in your bio. But what I like to do is I like to hand people the mic, and I like to tell them to go back as far as they want to go. You can go into your childhood if you want. You can go into grade school. It doesn't matter. And bring us forward through each point in time, telling us how you got from one place to the other, because, of course, we'll all land at the same place, which is eventually how you got into parking. So I'll hand the mic to you and let you just tell us your story. What's Walt Gray's story?
As you mentioned in my bio, I worked for a company called Tom Gray Management Company. That was actually my father. He was a franchised automobile dealer here in Houston for 25 years. And I grew up thinking that I was going to always be in the car business.
Okay.
And at 8 years old, my father had me in the back of the shop, sweeping the shop floor and carrying oil cans for the mechanics and doing stuff like that. And so I grew up in the back end of the automotive industry.
Yeah.
Working on vehicles. And I did that through high school and really into college, though I moved into the front office a little bit more, where I worked in management at the dealerships. But I've worked in every department and aspect of the franchise automobile business as there is. And maybe I digress a bit, but we were in the Arabian horse business. And
okay.
I grew up riding Arabian show horses.
Okay.
And to the point that it was a big business for us at the time. We had 123 head of Arabians at one point.
Wow.
And we were going all over the country. times were really different then. I was 16 years old and just had my driver's license. My parents had me pulling a 12-horse trailer across the country to go show horses. Can you imagine
No,
parents doing that today?
no.
And I can remember stories driving back at that age from Louisville, Kentucky, back to Houston and being on the road and so tired that I can't even remember how I got from Little Rock to Houston.
Yeah.
Anyways, it was quite interesting, but I learned a lot in the Arabian horse business. It taught me a lot about you're out there riding every single day, and there's a lot of work, and you had to care for that horse every single day. And it was that hard work that showed me in my life that paid off, and that if I work hard, that I might be able to get somewhere and pay off.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it was later on in my father's life and his career that he ended up getting into a situation in the business where we needed to diversify a bit.
Yeah.
And so we had a piece of property out here at George Bush that was right across the street from the airport, and got the idea at that point in time that I would build a long-term parking lot and that would put an automotive service department with it. And that was the business plan. And really drafted the business plan and then took it around to banks around Houston trying to sell it.
Yeah.
And many of the banks really were more interested in that automotive service part of it. People flying out of town, go park their car, get their car worked on. And everybody you talk to about it go, wow, that sounds like a great idea. It is, but ideas are a dime a dozen. And I learned that people don't drive their broke down cars to the airport.
Right.
So while we had a lot of experience in the automotive service world of what kind of revenue we would earn from repairing automobiles, really went out the window, because we ended up with a lot of light line work that really are loss leader work, oil changes and stuff like that. We weren't getting the heavy line work that we really needed. And the banks were more interested in the service aspect of it. And so we didn't really get enough money to build out the parking. As it needed to be built out. And it taught me a lot. And I think that all of us are somewhat shaped by our failures in life. And that I think still one of the greatest teachers in life is failure.
Yeah.
Where you've got to fail to be able to learn. And to a point that was a failure. I was making payroll and we kept the lights on but I didn't have enough parking, and I knew I didn't have enough parking.
Yeah.
And I worked on bringing in some additional investors and expanded the parking and realized that still wasn't big enough. And I was fortunate in that my father-in-law had a relationship with the Ladens, and Mr. Layden at one point in time, CEO at All Right Parking. And so he set up a meeting with us, and that's how I ended up selling to All Right Parking. And they asked me to stay with them, and I needed a job. Well, absolutely. I'm willing to stay with them. And so I stayed with them. And the idea was that we take that same concept to some of their other off airport locations, which we did.
Yeah.
And that lasted for about 2.5 years. It was with All Right Parking, and it was very good for me. I learned a lot more about the parking industry. With All Right, we actually picked up the privatization of the busing operation for the economy lot here at George Bush Intercontinental Airport. And so that was really my first getting my feet wet with operating working a contract here with the city here at this airport. And so shortly after that, 2.5 years after that, All Right then merged. They called it a merger, but it's really an acquisition, right? All Right was a private company, and Central Parking was a public company. And so it had to be an acquisition.
Yeah.
And so they merged, and we're coming now into around 1999, and Central Parking was working on privatization for the parking here for both Bush and Hobby Airport. And we actually worked on that and won it. And I met a mentor of mine, which means a lot to me. In fact, I had lunch with him today, and that's Steve McCormick. And he's a true mentor for me and a great guy. And Steve and me and one other person, we were it for getting the parking put together to privatize here at Houston. And we hired everybody, the three of us. We went and rented some conference room space at the hotel down the street and
Yeah.
And we put ads in the paper, and we had people came in, and we just started interviewing them. And with that, when the privatization, really the city promotes it, that the people that already work within parking, they're going to need a job. They want to stay with us. Yeah, those people want to stay with the city. They don't want to go with the parking operator.
Yeah.
And we had a good crew. We had some people that had parking experience, but as an organization, everybody from around the country would come in and help us with a transition like that. All of the major GMs from other airports and stuff would come in from around the country and help us. And that was a real blessing.
Yeah.
We needed them.
Yeah.
And the first day we took over at midnight. And at midnight, when we took over, I was at Hobby. That's where I was assigned to. And I was in the office, and the parking persons that were coming over supposedly to work with us from the city walked in and put their badge on the desk and said, "We quit." And we were like, okay. So right off the bat, we were shorthanded. So I learned a lot about transitions, parking operations at airports, and really became a mainstay in that and an expert with all the transitions that we had with central parking. From then on, I was involved in, and gave me a chance to go to other airports and see how they operate and what we were doing and what we needed to do. And then after that, central parking, a few years after that, I moved. I was at Hobby for a year, and then Steve moved me to Intercontinental to be the general manager at IAH, the airport manager at IAH. And then it wasn't long, about 6 months after that, that he had then actually moved me as the airport general manager and in charge of both airports. And it was in August of 2001. And in September, we had 9/11.
Yeah.
And I had literally just stepped in to that position. And Steve at that point was an acting regional for central parking. And he was in Canada working on the contract for Pearson Airport. And I was there alone when 9/11 hit. It was all quite fast paced. It all moved along really quickly. And maybe I've taken a lot more time than you wanted to get.
No, this is good. You're getting into some of the questions I was going to ask you. So this is good. I'll pull on all these threads.
I don't want to steal your questions.
No.
It was after you asked me to get where I am. It was central parking then actually merged with All Right Parking. And with All Right Parking, I was really a regional manager with the central region of Texas, and with SP Plus, which they left me in that same position at that time.
Yeah.
And so I worked with them for 16 years, and we get to that point.
Yeah. Okay. If you added up all your time in parking, how many years is that?
Right now?
Yeah.
Well, I started in 95, so 29 years in February.
Wow.
Opened Service Park in February of 95. So
yeah,
that's February. It'll be 29 years.
That is quite a career. I bet you've got stories. So my first question, I was going to go to 9/11 right away. So all of us that were alive, of course, will never forget where we were. My question to you is, how many planes ended up on the tarmac at Houston? And tell me about, so now that I'm thinking about, people were stranded, right? And so just set the scene for us on September 11th at 3:00 in the afternoon.
Obviously, it was a shock to all of us.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody was really more in shock than anything else. It was devastating.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in meetings with our client, Houston Airport System, about what we could do.
Yeah.
And what we were going to do.
Yeah.
And from a parking standpoint, there really wasn't a whole lot for us to do differently at that point in time. It was just to assure our personnel that everything's okay, Houston's fine, we don't have anything to worry about, and making sure that we had people that were actually showing up for work, because we had to continue to process transactions in our facilities. We didn't have people coming into park, but we had a lot of people that were going out, and we needed to be able to help them.
Yeah.
And you asked how many airplanes were on the airfield. I don't know. I don't know how many airplanes were on. However many were on the ground or were within the landing pattern at the time, or however many we had.
Yeah.
Early on, as we know, 9/11 ended up creating Homeland Security, and it's created a whole lot of other layers of security that we deal with today.
Yeah.
We up losing some parking areas because they were within the 300-foot rule. And so it was really setting up the 300-foot rule. And here we have some older terminals that were originally built for this airport at Bush, where they were on top of the terminal and we couldn't park up there. And so that's primarily what we were dealing with. And it was helpful that the airlines weren't flying then. It was giving us an opportunity to really figure out how we were going to deal with it all.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I hadn't even thought about that. So you had parking, you had cars within 300 feet. I didn't even know about that rule. There's a 300-foot rule that you can't be within 300 feet of the terminal.
Yeah. And not long after that, we were working on transitioning the Detroit McNamara terminal, which was opening up in Detroit, that new terminal. And they built still, I think, is the largest single parking garage that there is at an airport. It's a little over 11,000 parking spaces. And I was out there with the GM that was going to be the GM for that parking garage. We were running a forklift and picking up concrete traffic barriers and moving them into place so that we could create the 300-foot rule there at McNamara.
Oh, my. My. So they lost a couple thousand space or 1,000 spaces or something because they were too close.
Yeah, I don't remember how many spaces were lost, but yes.
Wow.
Yes.
All right. So it's my turn to digress. First of all, the reason I ask people to tell me their histories is because we would never get to Arabian horses if I just asked you how you got into parking. And so you had 125 head of Arabian horses.
Yeah, my parents did that. My family, we were deep in the Arabian horse business. We actually had built the first. Back then, we had different barns. We had a barn where we had all of our show horses, and we had a covered arena. And it's a nice facility. You bring people in there, you market your horses, and you want to sell them. And then we had a stallion barn. And you have a barn where you have your stallions and you keep your mares. And yeah, we actually built the first private artificial insemination lab in the state of Texas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're familiar with Yellowstone? Have you watched Yellowstone?
I'm familiar with it. I've not watched it.
Okay. All right. So Taylor Sheridan and is it 4 Sixes? Is it the 4 Sixes Ranch? So I've
not watched it.
I'm picturing you and on the ranch and Dusty and riding horses and all of that. It must have been a lot of fun, actually. Although it's probably seemed like work to you because it was a lot.
It was both. It was fun. I started riding horses. I started riding horses when I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
And it was a lifestyle for me. And I continued riding them after I got out of college. It wasn't until my first child was born that my wife said, okay, that's enough. Because you have to be every day at the barn. And you have to work your horse every day.
Yeah.
I've been top 10 in the United States 4 times.
Is that right?
Riding both English and Western.
Nice. Congratulations. That's fun. And you got trophies or you got belt buckles?
Oh yeah. You got all that stuff. You know?
So
it's all packed away in boxes in the attic.
I'm like, you should wear a belt buckle to the next show. I want to see your belt buckle. So I'll digress just for a second. I was on my way to Dallas. This has probably been a year or two ago. And I was sitting next to a woman who had one of those buckles, and the guy sitting across, he asked her about the buckle. I didn't even notice it until she pointed it out. And clearly it was coveted, right? It was a trophy. And so then I was talking to her about Yellowstone, of course, and all of that. And she had done all those things. And I asked her, I said, so are you famous? And she's, no, I'm not really famous, but I suspect she might've been a little famous if I'd have been in that business.
Yeah, probably.
So, yeah.
That's exactly right. In that business.
Yeah. It was entertaining. So that's great. It makes me think about, there's a gentleman here, there's an entrepreneur here in Indianapolis who actually, no, that's not true. He took the story from Ross Perot, because I think Ross Perot at the time at EDS put a question at the bottom of their application and asked if they'd ever worked on, and I think it specifically was a dairy farm, but I suspect if you'd have put that you worked with Arabian horses, he said those people got hired immediately. If you checked that you had worked on a farm, you got hired instantly, because the work ethic of the people that work on farms, for just the reason that you just described, was off the charts, and they just knew that they'd find a place for them to do work. So I'm sure you can probably relate to that.
Absolutely. I give a lot of, credit to growing up in that atmosphere of learning the value of hard work. And it does create a work ethic, and you certainly have to be self-motivated.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to take care of the horses, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back to parking just for a second. And through your career, you have obviously seen a lot of change, specifically around the technology that's being poured into these parking operations. I'm curious how you look at technology, or how you evaluate technology, and then how do you decide which technology goes in versus which technology isn't ready for prime time or isn't ready to go? What's your perspective on how you drop the technology into those parking operations?
I have to say that, probably like a lot of persons in my position, we get introduced to the technology.
Yep.
And there's a lot of technology has unbelievably changed the parking world.
Yeah.
When we took over here at Houston Airports and we privatized it back in January of 2000, they were still using a fee computer where the cashier had to put in the date and time. Can you even imagine?
No.
And that was part of the reason that they privatized, was for us to bring in technology to automate the transaction processing.
Yeah.
And we did it at the time because that was really the state of the art was MagStripe.
Yep.
And so we did it with MagStripe technology, and we immediately saw greater than 15% improvement. And so that tells you something, right?
Yes.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that in terms of where we go from automated transaction processing, we look for anything that we can do to reduce human interaction in that processing. And we find that in that, we can create a better customer experience. Customers love it. We probably about 3 years after we had put in the first credit card verifiers here, we did a focus group. We were involved in a focus group study with the airport. And part of it, they of course included parking, because they wanted people to tell them how their parking operator's doing. And here I am sitting there with my palms all sweaty, everything, wondering what these people are going to say. And one of the guys, who's a frequent business traveler, said, "The greatest thing y'all did was put in those machines where I can just pay with that credit card and go." And I was like,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
I think that, and really, Brian, one of the mistakes that was made in installing that system then, and didn't really realize it was a mistake then, and these are the lessons you learn from failure, is that we didn't have intercoms in our lanes. And that has hurt us tremendously with our customer experience.
Yeah.
And it's something we're rectifying now. And it's because I've got an opportunity to rectify it. I was the one that was responsible for installing that last state-of-the-art system that went to MagStripe and better in getting self transaction processing and all of that.
Yeah.
And so now here I am 23 years later, I'm doing the same thing, and I'm trying to incorporate what is really the next level of state of the art.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a system that's going to have intercoms in all of our lanes. It just has to.
Yeah.
And we're creating as much frictionless transaction processing as possible. Out on the outside, watching what's happening with gateless.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not opposed to gateless.
Yeah.
I have a little bit, and maybe because it's because of my age, I can remember 20 years ago, I'm going to my client, which whoever was sitting in my chair is now. And I'm like, look, we need to automate this parking. If we automate it, then we can reduce operating costs by X. And they're like, no, we like having the human interaction. And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? Of course, we ended up getting automation in.
Yeah.
And we ended up reducing the operating costs with the automation. And we've proved over time that it works. In fact, I started the pilot, which they allowed me to do was a pilot where we have a fully automated location. That's out at Eco Park at Hobby. We've never had an attendant there, and it's operated just fine. And the next lot we built, it was fully automated. And now as we convert all of our parking areas with this new system, they're all fully automated. We're not going to have any people in the lanes. And we need intercoms in all the lanes. We've also been watching what's happened with license plate recognition. I think it provides a lot for us right now, just from a security standpoint too.
For sure.
So I'm excited that we're going to be able to get LPR installed as well to go along with what we're doing. And we're going to create a better experience with our reservations. We're seeing our reservations grow quite a bit. In fact, I saw in December that 30% of our transactions were reservations last month.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought. I think they were making progress with that. And you asked me, where do I want to be in the next 3 to 5 years? I want to be reservation only.
Okay.
I want to be reservation only tomorrow, if I could.
Interesting.
I don't think we can get the public there.
Yeah.
Well, it's coming.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we're staying up with it. So I want to make sure we stay up with that technology that integrates with our parks equipment.
Yeah.
If there's any specific technology you want to ask me what I think about it, I'll tell you what I think. Sometimes I'm accused of being brutally honest. So.
Yeah, that's okay. The anecdote about not putting intercoms in your automated equipment, you've probably seen me talk where I talk about how just based on our data, we know that somebody presses a help button 85 million times a year in the United States. We also know that 60 million of those times it's the human error, not the machine, right? And so I think most parking operators, you're in good company, at least from the aspect of, I don't know that a lot of people put the infrastructure in to catch the help calls because they expected those help calls would be few and far between. I don't think they factored in human error very well. And so that's what's driving it. You get confused.
And to your point, we have the automation, we have human error. And so what do? The person we took out of the booth, we put out there in the plaza.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll help the customer. And so I'm hoping, and we certainly believe that we're going to be able to reduce that expense.
Yeah.
As we continue to move forward with automation. Transactions.
Yep. You're going to take full advantage of the automation. I think that's the other thing we saw through COVID. Parking operators, they didn't have a choice. They sent people home because that was the order. And then it was really hard to get those people back. And so they had to operate truly in an automated fashion without the crutch. And so it's turned out, in some ways, COVID's turned out well for them, for at least operators to maximize the investment they made in the automation because they can't find the people to begin with. So that's good. All right. So I have to hear, so I did not know about the 300-foot rule. I would imagine that security, you talked about LPR and security is a big deal in airports because cars are parked and they could, for all we know, they could be full of dynamite or C4 or whatever. So are there other security things that we don't know about? And please don't tell me anything that would make you have to kill me. But what other things around security do you worry about in an airport that I would be oblivious to, even with my parking experience?
From a parking aspect, we still have these rules in place through Homeland Security, depending on what threat level we're at.
Okay.
And if we get to a threat level of orange or red, then we've got to go back to inspecting every vehicle before they enter the airport. So during after 9/11, one of the things that the airport did is we had to put people out on our roadways, and we actually stopped them on the roadway and had to inspect their vehicle. And you had to you got a stick with a mirror on the bottom of it, and you're scoping the underneath. And sometimes you ask them to open the trunk or whatever it might be. And then that progressed to being random, where they would stop they let 10 cars through and then they'd stop.
Yeah.
But we operated at some garages around the country where that activity was conducted at the entrance to the parking garage. Now, can you imagine the queues to get in to park? And here we are with security staff that you have to hire and to go out and perform these inspections. Yeah, that's still a real thing that could happen again.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so something I should have asked you before. Give me a sense of size and scope. How many spaces do you have between both of the airports? How many shuttles? Because you're running transportation too, so you got to run shuttles. Tell us all how big a job you really have.
Between both airports, we have 39,000 parking spaces. Yeah, we've got roughly about 8,500 of those are employee parking.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of employee parking. We operate 55 shuttle buses, soon to go to 58, but we operate 55 shuttle buses. Actually, I say that it's soon to go to 61 because we're going to be creating a new employee shuttle here soon. With United Airlines is going to be building a new Terminal B here at George Bush.
Okay.
And so we're having to close down some parking that's on top of the Terminal B garage, and we're going to have to move it out to shuttle it. But we operate about 20 courtesy carts in various garages and lots to assist customers from their vehicle to the terminal entrance.
Okay.
And we from a ground transportation standpoint, we're responsible for TNCs, rental cars, taxis.
Yeah.
That's another item that I'm working on trying to automate. We still dispatch taxis here, and we shouldn't be. And a lot of these things I work on for years. I started working on changing out the parking equipment when I moved over in 2016, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And we actually have our first equipment landed now. Right?
Okay.
That's a win.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a win. So I am working on trying to get out of the taxi dispatch business. We need to.
Yeah.
Taxis don't generate enough revenue to even cover what it costs us to dispatch.
Interesting. Huh. That's I did not know that. All right. So you have to have at least one or two good parking stories over your career. Pick your favorite parking story. Somebody's late. They leave the car running. There has to be something out there.
Well, there's all of those.
Yeah.
Out of the thousands, I don't know how I'm going to pick one, but I'm going to pick one. And if she ever watches this, she'll probably shoot me. But my daughter was going on a business trip with who she's a mechanical engineer and really proud of her. And
yeah,
she's going on a business trip, and she goes out and she parks out at our economy lot, Eco Park. Looks good. She's saving money for the company. And she comes back, and I don't know how this happens, but when she comes back, her boss needs a ride with her. And so they get on the bus, they go to the lot, they get to her car, and she goes to start her car, and her car won't start. And so they think it's the battery and that the battery's dead. And so somebody goes over there to try and jump or whatever and look at it, and they go, "You don't have any gas." And there are so many people that tell us, and it happens from our Eco Park lot primarily, really, that tell us they come back and say, "Somebody siphoned all the gas out of my car." No, they didn't. She was in such a hurry, she left the car running. And we knew she left the car running because somebody out at the lot had documented that car was running. They didn't know it belonged to me or to my daughter. And eventually it got to her that she had left her car running and it ran out of gas. So here she is without any gas, and she's calling me, "Dad, I need some gas. What do I do?" I don't know what time of night it was when she has her boss with her. And so I call somebody and say, "Go get some gas and put it in her car."
So it's funny that I would pick that story. Obviously, you can just imagine you're pulling into a space. It's an eco lot. I've parked in long-term parking before. I don't now. Sorry, Perry. But you see the shuttle and you're like, I got to go. because it's going to be another 15 minutes before that shuttle shows up. I got to get on that shuttle.
And where ours is positioned, airplanes take off that way. And they take off that way. And not only do they can't hear their car running, and push button vehicles back then, they were new to people. And there were a lot of people that were leaving their cars running when they had the push button vehicles. They not your keys out anymore, right? And they'd come back and tell us, oh, somebody siphoned all the gas out of my car. Somebody's going to pick your car out of 8,000 cars parked out here and siphon the gas out of it.
Yeah.
You left it running. Oh, no, I couldn't have done that. And the other thing is, with the airplanes taking off over this lot, it sets off the alarms. Oh. So people come back and they go, my battery's dead. Why is my battery dead? Because your alarm's going off every time an airplane goes up. And
that's funny.
You talk about my stories. I'm not sure I mentioned this earlier, but I grew up in the automobile business. And of course, cars are a very emotional product. What I never really understood was how emotional a parking spot is.
Yeah.
And I'm learning even more about it today because we're having to relocate. This is the only airport I've worked at that's a large hub airport that has allowed employees to park in the terminal garages. And the only reason that we did it was after 9/11, because they wouldn't let us open up those garages to the public. And they'd let us open it up to the employees because they had a security badge. They had to go through security protocol and a security badge, and they let us open them up. Well, Steve McCormick and I were telling the director then at the time, don't do that. You'll never get them out of there. And now here I am 23 years old, and I've got to get them out of there. That's one of the things that's one of the things that I started when I first moved over in 16-2 is building a consolidated employee lot. We've got to move the employees out of our terminal parking areas because we're full.
Yeah.
And we're turning the public away.
Yeah.
And that's where we're headed. And this with United's Terminal B, that we've entered that world of moving employees out of the CTA and into a full operation. So it's been fun.
So that reminds me, and my poor podcast listeners will hear me say this. I've said this 3 or 4 times, but Don Charlie, who is AVP he runs parking for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. He coined the phrase that everybody wants to park under their desk.
Yeah, sure they do.
Yeah. And so that leads me to probably the last question before we go to the lightning round. So I'm more familiar with universities and the stories they tell about trying to keep all of their constituents happy, right? It is impossible to make everybody happy. By definition, if you're going to make somebody happy, you're going to make someone else unhappy. It sounds as though you've got similar challenges at the airport with employees, but there's probably also other constituents that feel very passionate and emotional about their parking.
Sure. Right. I'm not sure really what the question might be here, except that we both have limited resources.
Yeah.
Universities, hospitals, airports.
Yeah.
We have a limited resource, and we have to decide how best to use that limited resource. And taking care of the student or the patient or your airline customer is priority.
Right.
And it's hard for the doctors and the nurses and the students and or maybe the employees to really understand that you've got a limited resource and you're just trying to figure out the best way to use it. I've made those calls before to a university when my kids were in school and saying, hey, can you get them in this parking area?
Yeah, it's hard. You're right. It's limited. And I'm sure, hopefully you probably can resonate with this as well. The universities say there's plenty of parking. There's just not enough parking where everybody wants to park. I got plenty of parking, a 15-minute shuttle ride away, but I don't have lots of parking under their desks.
And I'm headed that way where we'll have plenty of parking, but it's not going to be under your desk.
Yeah. Oh man, I do feel for you, because even as a consumer or as an employee, to lose that you're going to cause real pain, right? Lengthened times and all of that. Yeah. And so I am empathetic, but of course, again, it's back to what's the priority?
Sure. We've got customers now because we're full.
Yeah.
That see, that employees are parking in there. Who in the world decided to put employees in there? Employees shouldn't be parking in there. Why are they in there?
Yeah.
What idiot did that? Yeah. So And they're right. It's no different for any other business that you go to. You go to a restaurant, they don't have the employees parking at the front door of the restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's move into the lightning round. Is really not a lightning round because it's really a series of questions that I ask everybody. So my first question for you is, what phrase is Walt Gray known for? And so what I mean is, so Don Charlie, I'm sure if people talk about, if somebody else were to utter the phrase parking under the desk, they would know that it originated at Don Charlie's desk. So if someone in your operation utters a phrase, what is that phrase that they know it was Walt Gray that coined the phrase?
You cannot expect what you don't inspect.
Okay. All right. That sounds like, knowing you, that sounds exactly, that sounds like Walt Gray.
Yeah. I grew up with the fresh eye approach.
Yeah.
In the parking business. And it's really important because I can go through the parking lot myself and I see it, I see this stuff all the time, but I grew up with the fresh eye approach and that we got to go out and inspect our facilities. And so we expect there's multiple layers of different positions that have responsibility to go out and inspect the facilities.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like fresh eyes. That's also, I bet people would associate that with you as well. Okay, next question. I might know the answer to this, but maybe you'll surprise me. So what is the hardest thing you've ever done in your life? We'll get to parking in just a second.
Like you talk about the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
Look, don't we all
compartmentalize? Sure. Yeah. Yep.
Our lives, you've got your personal life and you got your work life.
Sure.
Can I pick a challenge for each of those?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, it's your show.
It's your show, but I think from my personal life, of course, we have so many challenges. That's really hardest things to do. I mean, you talk about raising your kids or whatever it might be. But I think that I'm going to say that right now, where I am in my life right now, from a personal perspective, the hardest thing is having to be a parent to my parents.
Oh, brother.
When you got to take their keys away from them because they shouldn't be driving anymore. I got two other brothers, and how I got to be the one to do it, I don't know. But I told them it wasn't fair.
Yeah, it is not fair. You'll draw tears from me on that one for sure. It is brutal.
Yeah, and there's so many other things you're doing to be a parent to your parents.
Yes.
And then maybe this one's too easy for me, but from my work life. But I think it's changing careers, reinventing yourself.
Okay.
Where you are.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people today that might change careers 2 or 3 times in their life. And I've only had to do it once, fortunately. But that was a hard thing for me.
Yeah.
Was changing careers and reinventing myself and who I was and what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So what's interesting is we were talking just before we got started. You worked with your dad, and I know that how much I enjoy. So my son and I play golf, and I know how much I enjoy. Like, we just have a blast when we're together.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine you worked with your dad a long time. It was probably a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely it was. He and I played golf every Friday. He and I went out and played golf every Friday. And of course, he taught me as a kid to be a hunter, and we hunted together. I did everything with my father. That was a big change. That's part of that reinventing yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I suspect it probably didn't take you long to reinvent yourself. You've proven, at least in our interactions, to have a really sharp business mind, and you certainly have got a lot of gumption. So I'm sure you took right off. Obviously, you took right off.
Look, I think it's through our challenges and our experiences in life that we evolve as who we are, and so I've got a lot, and I've got failures in my life. I can't tell you how many banks I got turned down by when I was working on getting service parks started.
Yeah.
And I had 2 young kids, and it was
you just had to keep going.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. We might have touched on it already, but what's the hardest thing about your parking job? moving employees from the garage. And I'd laugh so that I do not cry. Hopefully no employees are going to listen to this and get upset with us, but man, that's hard. That is hard.
Yeah, it is hard. I understand. I've got my own parking space right out here. You might be looking at some of them through the window behind me. I don't want to lose that. I get it. I just don't know how else to explain it. But what's the hardest thing? I think one of the things that I think the hardest thing is trying to get those within the organization that don't really know parking or understand parking to understand why I am recommending or advocating for doing something.
Yes.
Just like changing out the parking equipment. I'm sure at the time they were like, why do we need to do that? We're collecting $100 million a year. Everything's good. Why do we need to do that?
Yes.
And no different than what we want people in the booths. We want to be personal. And why would we want to do that?
Right. So you've touched on something that I'm quite passionate about, and I've shared with people that I hope at some point I can figure out how to cross this podcast over into the mainstream so that non-initiated non-parking people can begin to hear some of these stories about how hard it is and how complex it is, because parking people absolutely get abused because everyone 1 degree separated from parking thinks that it's just parking. How hard could it be? And all you have to do is spend a day, 2 days in the parking world, and you begin to understand really quickly that it is really a lot more complex and a lot harder than it looks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Parking's easy.
Yes.
Right?
What could be harder? Just put the car between 2 white lines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
I don't know how we bridge that gap.
Yeah.
I think that this forum right here could be something that could help for people to understand. I don't think people understand the complexity of the systems that are needed to track just the revenue.
Yes. Yeah.
They think, oh, it's easy. You just put your card in and you pay, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's absolutely true.
Yeah. I used to, when I was working for the parking operator here, and I'm working on trying to hire somebody for our accounting position, and that accounting position is brutal. I couldn't get people to stay in it for more than about 2 years because you just can't even imagine how brutal it is. You've got a public company working, you have to stay within Sarbanes-Oxley, and you've got the demands from the client and everything else. But when they would come in, and I would ask them when they came in, I said, when you came here, where'd you park? And they'd tell me where they parked. I said, when you went in to park, how did you go in? They have options to put a credit card in or take a ticket. Well, I took a ticket. And I'd say, what does that ticket represent to you? And very few of them even equated it to the fact that it's revenue.
Yeah.
And these are people coming in applying for an accounting position.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you literally turn the lights on them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They were like, oh, dang. I had never even crossed my mind. That's good stuff. All right. So then in that vein, if there was one thing that you could wave a magic wand over and fix in parking, what would it be?
People should expect they have to pay for it.
You are, that's not the first time I've gotten that answer.
Really?
Yeah, for sure.
First time somebody blew up because they had to pay $1. I didn't say it, obviously, but I'm sitting there thinking, come on, man, it's $1.
Come on, man. Not only is it $1, but you're not walking into a grocery store. I just had this conversation with, I think it was Isaiah. You're not walking into a grocery store and walking out with a bag full of groceries and not thinking twice about paying for it. You're like,
and plus from a city side and city perspective, citizens think, oh, my tax dollars paid for that parking garage. Why do I have to pay for it? My tax dollars did.
Yeah, no.
And then you go back to the high cost of free parking.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a very good book written about that.
Yeah, Don Shoup. We wrote a bestseller, right?
Yeah.
All right. So today, when you're not parking cars, what do you do for fun?
I probably talked about it a little bit. what I primarily do. I hunt and fish. I'm a Texas boy, born in Texas, grew up in Texas.
Yeah.
And my father was the same, and I've done the same with my son.
Nice.
Yeah. So we hunt and fish. I was at my deer lease the past 2 weekends in a row.
Nice. What'd you
So
catch?
I love that when somebody says, "What'd you catch?" Because I've never gone, well, fishing, I catch, but I've never gone hunting and caught anything. I've yet to shoot it.
Okay, fair enough.
You may want to cut this out. A lot of people don't put up well with that.
Oh, that's okay. We're gonna.
My son, if you want to know, my son got an axis.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
It's a beautiful animal. You ought to look it up.
Okay.
It's a beautiful animal. They're not indigenous to the United States. They're actually from India.
Oh.
And we have these we hunt low fence. So we're not a high fence game managed type. We're low fence, but there's a high fence place that some axis got off of years and years ago and just have proliferated in the area.
Okay. How do you spell it?
AXIS.
Oh, okay. All right. That's pretty simple. All right. I will look it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll send you a picture of what my son with the animal, and you'll see it.
That would be great. Do you take an axis down with one shot?
You hope to. Anything.
If you're lucky.
No, it's skill.
Yeah.
You hope to. Yeah. But yeah.
And what's the range? How close are you? How close was he to the animal?
He was probably 80 yards.
Oh, that's a long way. No, that's not a long way. I'm standing on the 20-yard line looking at the far end zone. That seems like a long way to shoot a gun.
No, that's not far at all. We're really accurate at 200 yards, but I've got a scope and a rifle that I can shoot up to 400 yards. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. There you go. I learned something else new.
Yeah. No, he was close.
He was close. All right. Sometime we'll shoot a gun. I'll shoot 80 yards and we'll see.
Okay.
I will tell you that my dad took me hunting as well. We hunted pheasants in Michigan.
Yeah.
And it's been a very long time. I have been invited a couple of times to go hunting, and I don't trust myself with a gun anymore. I don't need any Dick Cheney incidents. I'm like, I don't trust myself with a gun. So I retired from shooting pheasants, but I have fond memories of us shooting beautiful pheasants and gutting them right there. And my dad tearing open the gizzard, and there's rocks in the gizzard or in the guts. And I can remember that like it was yesterday. And that was literally 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So great memories.
You might be losing some people on your show here.
Yeah, that's okay. Nah, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. You're from Texas. They should know that already.
It doesn't bother me a bit, but
yeah, that's okay. All right. So last question here. What are you most proud of?
I'd get back to that part where we compartmentalize.
Compartmentalize. Yeah, go ahead. Give me a couple of different answers. Sure.
Our personal life and our
no, it's good. It's unfair to ask it for one single threaded. You can go a couple of different ways. I'd like those answers.
I think for my personal life, what I'm most proud of, I think that in June this year, my wife and I are going to be married 40 years.
Nice.
And I think that in today's time that maybe that's not as common.
Yeah.
And
that's awesome.
And I have to be too corny, but that's me too. I get that part as you grow older together that I love her more today than I did the day I married her.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are you a country music fan?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So Brad Paisley's got a song to that effect. I don't know if you know that song, and if you don't, I'll send it to you.
I do know.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of my favorites.
I didn't take that answer from Brad.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think it's called Then. Actually, it's on my wife's playlist. I'm only 10 years behind you. It'll be 30 years in August for Jill and I. So it's good.
Yeah.
It's good. All right. And then how about in your professional life?
It's a little not uncommon, but doesn't happen very often in that an airport has one operator for a long period of time.
Yeah.
For years.
Yeah.
And for 17 years of it here, I was responsible for that. And I can't tell you how many different contracts that we went through and amendments to the agreements that we went through. And they're all very challenging.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that. I'm proud that at least some people along the way recognized the value and respected respected it and had confidence in what we were doing, and because we were making improvements.
Yeah.
And so I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, that 17-year run. You're right, especially now. Again, airports might be a little bit different because they're a little bit more complex, but I do remember. So today is, well, I shouldn't say that because this is going to run in a couple of months, but today is my 8-year anniversary in parking. And I do remember being floored by the fact that a private operator could be canceled in 30 days. I came from an IT world where the contracts were long. You signed a 3 to 5 year contract and you could count on it, right? Unless you messed it up, but 30 days, good heavens. So in a 30-day world, lasting 17 years is definitely an accomplishment. So that's great. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
All right. I told you the time would go fast. It's gone super fast. We've gotten through an hour, and I want to say thank you again. I learned things about you, and that's one of the reasons I do these podcasts, because I learn things about the guests that I bring on. And any parting words for the podcast listening audience? Keep listening. Okay. That's great.
I think that this is a good forum and that we can all learn something from each other. I've watched the podcast and I learned something from it. I go through my daily work with, what am I going to learn new today?
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Lifelong learner. That's good.
Thank you, Brian, for having me.
Yeah. That's been great. All right. That'll do it for this segment of Harder Than It Looks. Walt, again, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. It was a great show. My guest today for segment 2 of Harder Than It Looks is Celeste Ching, a remarkable leader of 2 companies, plus the leader of her 4 children's education. As the CEO of C3 Partners and C3 Staffing, Celeste will help us appreciate how hard it is to lead 2 companies and then homeschool 4 children. For Celeste, it all began from a business perspective in 2018 when she secured her first client in the parking industry. We're going to talk about that. Since that time, her firm has experienced exceptional growth. And then we're going to dive into the second reason she's on segment 2 of Harder Than It Looks, when we hear more about all that's involved when you take charge of the education of your 4 children at home. Celeste, thank you for joining us and welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting. It is harder than it looks, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's
Both of
struggling all kinds of things. And I think that's the secret sauce, is you have to understand that everyone is juggling more than one thing.
Yes.
So this is exciting.
And so if everyone is juggling more than one thing and they have one job, then you're juggling 10 things because you have at least 3 jobs. No, you have 6 jobs, right? 2 jobs plus 4 children, who I'm assuming, unless you got 2 sets of twins or quad.
Then there's a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. So they're all just bucketed together. So that in and of itself is its own full-time job. But I love talking about that. And I love talking about the family aspect, because when you're talking to candidates, you have to know what's not on that resume. And that ultimately is what creates these incredible conversations, because you're not only just hiring this candidate, you're hiring their whole family.
Yes.
So it's a really fun way to just be relatable in that way, in that department.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's great. A while back, I was reading a biography or a story about Bill Belichick, and of all the people that you would expect to be unyielding around people's personal lives, it's Bill Belichick. And yet he talked about how people's personal lives and their professional lives are inextricable. You can't separate them. And so you have to know, back to your point, you have to know what's going on at home because you're inheriting both. And you have to be sensitive to the fact that people have personal lives that are going to impact their professional lives. And so that's really insightful. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because when you're recruiting, especially in parking or just in any industry, they have to trust you. And if you can be vulnerable on what it is that you're doing on a day-to-day that changes the trajectory of your life and your family, they trust that and value that so much. And so there's a lot. I love talking about the family aspect when we are doing recruiting.
Yeah, that's great. So are you originally from Texas?
I am born and raised.
Okay. All right. So spoken like another fellow true Texan. I think Brene Brown's from Texas as well, isn't she? Or she at least
Uh,
lives in Austin.
I'm in Austin. I don't
Yeah.
know. I was born in Houston, raised in Dallas, and I went to
Okay.
college in Dallas. I never left Dallas. I travel a ton, but I've never left this area.
So I know lots of people. In fact, I just met somebody who was moving to Dallas and they thought they died and gone to heaven. So
It's a
Dallas
great
must be heaven.
place. It's a great place, and it's a great, yeah, we've really enjoyed it.
That's great. Okay, we're going to start professional first, and then we'll end up with the kids and the
Sure.
homeschooling.
Yeah.
But you've spent, looking at your LinkedIn posts or your LinkedIn profile, you've spent a good chunk of your career working for others.
Mm.
And then in 2018, you made the decision to strike out on your own. I'm really interested in what led you there.
So I worked for a market research firm for about 10 years. And what I did for them was understand buyer behavior. I had to understand how consumers picked up a bottled water and chose this water versus another. And so I worked with huge brands, Disney, Nike, Adobe, you name it. And we did a bunch of A/B testing to figure out how these products went to market. So a lot of what I was trained to do was understand consumer behavior. When I started having kids, I was a heavy outside seller. So I was required to be a road warrior. I was constantly traveling, I was
Mm.
constantly at trade shows. And I know a lot of people can relate to that. You're away from your home. When I had my first child at about 2.5 months, I was already on the road. I was already traveling, already on a trade show. And I remember telling my husband, I don't want him to be raised by a nanny. Like, what can we do? And I ended up leaving the corporate world, recognizing very quickly that I am inherently just wired to work. I love it. I love it so much, but I also love my children. So that goes back to the homeschooling and the working thing. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But I ended up meeting somebody in parking who was building out a team, and they were like, hey, what are your thoughts on helping us? Because I couldn't work for them because it would put me right back to what I just left.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
can help strategically figure out how to build out what it is and other versions of what I would have done if I was a seller. And we ended up starting from the ground floor, and started putting these pieces together in an industry that I have never heard of. I knew parking from a consumer perspective. We park. Back then, you had the dollars that had to go in the slots, and they might have not gone in, and a lot of stress. That was my vision of parking. But when we started building out these teams, they were on the technology side. And what I loved so much about that is I loved that technology was emerging back then. It was very new. It was in an archaic industry.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, that's how I ended up in this industry. Was I wanted to be a seller, but I couldn't. But I can recruit and help build out sales teams. So since then, I've expanded outside of sales, but ultimately, that's how I got it.
Okay. All right. I think this is like question 5, but I'm going to dive in now because you now know one of the reasons we started the podcast is because parking is a lot harder than it looked. I've been in the industry 6 years. And of course, just like you as a consumer, I'm like, how hard could it be? You drive in, you drive out, you pay, like it's just parking. And it's actually maddening because everyone that's not in parking doesn't understand. But it also looks like you've got experience in other industries. I'm interested if there's a difference between a parking individual and certainly IT. I saw that you had some IT recruiting experience as well, but talk about how parking is different from a people perspective and then maybe just as an industry.
So the experience that I've had is parking. You're taking an individual and you're asking them to trust the idea of a startup in parking,
Yeah.
something that they're not familiar with. So think about how crazy that sounds. I can take an individual and say, hey, I've got a startup SaaS technology in a manufacturing industry or whatever industry that is, oil and gas. They've heard of those. They don't
Yeah.
think about parking. And
Yeah.
so that's a significantly harder sell because I'm trying to get you to believe and trust that this unsexy industry is going to change the trajectory of your career. And that's a lot of how I have to think of it so many different ways and how a consumer could possibly process this. But I love the unsexy, and I love that the competition and entry is significantly harder to get into in parking because you guys were so niche. But
Yeah.
once you're in, that trajectory is so much higher. And I love that. In other industries, you're just going to go that ladder in the same pace that you normally would. But in parking, from my experience, it's rewarding if I can get someone to truly believe it.
Yeah. Okay. You got any good stories? Anybody that you had to sell particularly hard to get into parking and now they're a rock star in parking? Are there any out there?
I do have an individual that I just adore. Actually, I've got two different stories. I've got an individual
Okay.
that I adore that I brought from, I think it was in the auto industry, brought him in, and I really had to court him because one of the things about what I know about parking is everybody has phenomenal personalities. It is truly a joyful industry. You guys genuinely
Yeah.
love what you do and you love each other. And even when you're not playing nice in the sandbox, you guys were all still really good friends. And what I liked about this individual is he came in and he really changed the trajectory of a specific vertical that he was. And then since
Yeah.
then, his career has skyrocketed and now he's a VP or SVP somewhere else still within parking. I've got another gentleman that I met in parking, never did any business with him, but I recruited him out of parking. And the reason I recruited him out of parking is because his growth trajectory for his career was never going to go anywhere because he has been so siloed in a specific geographic area. In
Okay.
parking, your geography and where you live is very important. Everybody wants to buy from people that know, that they like, and are from their area, and they can relate to the locations that are within their backyard. Taking somebody out of parking, getting them experience that they wouldn't have gotten any other way, which in this specific case was a very large national footprint, and then bringing them back to parking, he came in so much higher than he would have been if he would have stayed. So I've had some really cool success stories. I hate taking people out, but I do want people to be excited about their career because it's their life and it's their livelihood. And if we can do something just to pivot you just a little bit to make you a little bit more valuable, let's rock and roll. Let's do it. Now's the time.
Interesting. Okay. So the second individual you were talking about, actually, you pushed them out of parking, but you sucked them back into parking. Is that?
No,
is that
no,
true?
I didn't bring them back. I didn't bring them back,
Okay.
but the goal was for them to then to position themselves to be able to be
Okay.
viewed as an asset when they
Yeah.
emerge themselves back. So all I did was take them out, got them the experience that they needed. And then from there, someone else recruited them back in, which was the goal. The goal is not always me, but that was the goal, was to get them right into the position that was meant for them.
Yeah. Awesome. What a great story. Okay. All right. So then go back to starting the business. What was the hardest part besides, obviously, you found a client and it sounds like you stumbled into it. They're like, hey, can you help me? But then, okay, so that's easy. What was the hardest part of getting things really rolling?
Really understanding parking. So
Yeah.
parking is not just parking a car in a garage. So when you're really thinking about it, we've got license plate recognition, we've got parks, we have the operators and all the components that happen inside of that. You have your fintech, you have everything. And so I had to understand how all these pieces married each other because in
Yeah.
some degree everybody does. And in
Yep.
order to be good at what I did and to be able to be trusted by these individuals that I'm asking to come into an industry that is to some degree very foreign to them, I had to be the smartest person in the room. So I spent so much time studying, going to trade shows, understanding the competitors, understanding the market, just trying to understand the landscape of this enormous multi-billion-dollar industry that's so quiet, that's nobody talks about. So I had to study a lot. It's very challenging. And then also getting people to be comfortable with moving to a smaller startup. And when they're so used to the 800-pound gorillas in
Yep.
parking and they've got that job security and there is that funding and they don't have to worry about anything. So there's a lot of different hurdles that you have to overcome. But once you can get somebody to be excited and see the true value of what it could do for them and for the organization that we're asking them to join, that part becomes a little bit easier. But it's just that initial, you just take my call.
Get me in. Okay.
Yeah.
So then in 23, so just last year, you started a staffing business. So now you're the CEO of two businesses. Talk about how you juggle those two roles.
So the staffing one was very organic for us. And what
Okay.
we've been doing, everything we've been doing has been full perm. So full-time employees across multiple different verticals and all different types of industries. What I liked about staffing is as we have 2020 is behind us, thank goodness. But as
Yeah.
we have been moving forward, I have noticed and seen a very large trend of people hiring for projects. And a lot of individuals love the idea of being able to work at a JP Morgan for a year or so, and then they're hopping over to Neiman's for a couple of days. And they like that. And so we
Yeah.
just thought, okay, let's capitalize on this because especially in parking too, as we're starting to bring in more emerging technologies into this industry, sometimes you don't need a full-time staff, but you just need a project, a group of people that are subject matter experts in specific technologies to come in, fill out this project, and then they're off. And
Right.
you and then we house the burden of all of that. We're doing their healthcare. We're doing all of that. There are technically our employees, and you guys are just contracting them from us. And it's just a lot easier for some people, and they've really enjoyed the idea of us, doing that for them. So it was something that just came naturally, and I do think after 2020, it was something that we've seen a lot more, and it was just an easy transition for us.
It makes a lot of sense. The ability to plug in some expertise for a short period of time and then shed that expense without having to fire somebody I like it a lot,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
We've done that a couple of different times, certainly on the sales and marketing side, and then even on the dev team side. I'm with you 100%. All right. So then let's see. I'm getting down to question 5 here. So let's talk about the hardest job you have, and that is teaching the future citizens of the world
I love
in
it.
your home.
So
So I would imagine you've got the 5 and the 7. Are you doing school for the 4-year-old as well? Obviously, you're probably, it's
she's
well,
along for the ride.
yeah,
She's along for
sure.
the ride. She'll do
Yeah.
anything. Once you're in a third born and a fourth born, at that point, you're automatically 7 and 8 at that point.
Yeah.
No, the reason we started doing this, I wanted to homeschool before I ever had kids. I loved the
Okay.
idea. I nannied for a family that homeschooled. They had 7 children, and they were just an incredible family. And I left a lasting impression. But as I started growing my career, I recognized that my children had to be a placeholder on my calendar in the same capacity as my clients were.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
if not, then I'm spending the evenings with my children when they're at the worst behaved moments of their day. And that wasn't what way that we were bonding. We weren't gonna grow. We weren't living a very happy family when everyone was angry at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. So they're a permanent calendar block on my schedule. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, I homeschool, and it's just me and them. And they fill their cup, I fill my own cup. And then when we disperse for the rest of the day or the rest of the week, there isn't this, I haven't seen my mom, I need my mom. And so it's been really helpful for me. And that's how I've ultimately been able to juggle all of the hats that I wear, my sombrero, as I call it.
Yeah, that's awesome. They say, who says you can't have it all? It sounds like you've got it all. And as somebody who's not very familiar with homeschooling, I'm curious about how you choose a curriculum and then get smart about the curriculum, smart enough to teach it to your kids. How does
Yeah.
that?
So we partner with a school called Coram Deo Academy, and they're the nation's largest classical Christian school. And
Okay.
so what they do is they give our children an environment of being in a school. So they go on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they have a teacher, they have a headmaster, they wear a uniform, and they go. And all day they are heavy pressed on a specific curriculum. The next
Okay.
day, which is our home day, I get a very detailed sheet of what I am responsible for. Whether it's their history, their phonics, whatever it is, there is a very detailed. And each day it takes us anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to get through our entire home day. And so that's been really helpful. I don't have to I interviewed them. I know what they're bringing to the table. We partner together. If I have questions, I've got a teacher that I can go and ask. But it ultimately, I like that my kids get to be in a school. They're in sports with this school. So everything feels normal, except they only go 2 days.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So they go to school, but then you spend time with them. So is it Tuesday and Thursday or Monday, Wednesday, Friday? How does that work?
So Monday, Wednesdays, they're in a school setting. So we drop them
Okay.
off. And then
Yep.
Tuesday, Thursdays are homeschool days. And then Fridays are just free days.
Okay. So then now you're probably getting an inkling what your kids are good at and what they're not so good at. So tell us a little bit about how you apply your marketing and your specificity around knowing behaviors to propping up your kids or giving them extra or less extra, as it were, based on the curriculum and how they're, which way they're leaning?
Yeah. So my oldest son, he is a true firstborn, true and true. And what I mean by that is he is a genius. I don't know if he has a photographic memory. I can't figure it out. He can memorize things. His ability to retain things is fascinating, but he's so lazy. So lazy. And so I have to figure out different ways in which I can encourage and excite him to do something that comes so organically easy for him. I mean,
Yeah.
it's true. And so I have to really get creative with him. He's that one where I can't just leave you alone. I can't just say, hey, here's your work. Let me know when you're finished and I'll check on you. I have to have I literally have to have eyes on him at all time because if not, he will stray. He's very lazy. My other son, Harrison, he is a hands-on guy. And I learned that very quickly when he was very little. So everything we do regards he has to touch it. He has to see it. So we're creating a letter A. He's creating it out of Play-Doh because that's something that will help his brain process exactly how that A needs to work. Olivia and Abigail, my two daughters, they're just along for the ride. I'm curious to see how we work together. Next year, Olivia will be homeschooled. So we'll see how that all works. But I like that they're around. I like that they see that we have a schedule. We start at this time. We have lunch at this time. We end at this time. And then mommy goes to work. So they are pretty clockwork on how we do everything. So it'll be fun to see how the girls transition.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so your oldest, I'm sorry, the second one, Harrison, that name resonates with me. It was on the list, and unfortunately I shot it down because Harry Wolf isn't going to work very well. We love the name Harrison, but invariably it was going to get shortened to Harry. And then your first son, tell me his name again.
Sebastian.
Oh, Sebastian. Okay, maybe I didn't catch the first time. Okay, so he's efficient. Let's call it efficient, as opposed to
Sure.
lazy. Although you've probably called him lazy too. But I do think that's interesting because people in sports or in education all the time, you get someone who's so good that you have to find ways to challenge them. Then you have to really find. I would imagine it's going to be later. It's going to be even harder because as he's acing his tests, this is so easy, and you got to find a way to push him. So I'm interested, how far does the school go? Does it go all the way through 12th grade?
I've just got to be okay. If you don't want to pick up, if there's have to be okay with letting that go, because I know that is just not how your brain operates. And I've acknowledged it. So a lot of him specifically, because he is so smart, I have to be okay with just being, all right, Celeste, let it go. Let it go. Because the goal as a parent, and this is a good fundamental takeaway, is your goal as a parent should be to preserve your relationship with your children, not
Yeah.
make their lives insanely crazy because they're not living within your box. And my
Yeah.
box is very specific. I'm very type A, but I have to be okay with the fact that he is 100% the most laid back, chill guy that there is.
Yeah. So that feels like a ear tug pro tip for anybody listening. As a leader, you have to be okay with people having their things that they're not particularly good at, they don't like to do. And you have to try and find a way to either motivate them and or just let it go, which is
Yeah.
probably more often.
No, 100%. I think when people are hiring, there's always this box. Celeste, I want you to find everybody with this box, which ultimately ends up being a unicorn. But you have to find those one areas that you're like, okay, I can live without this, or I can train that. And being more open, I think, is helpful. I think having my children home with me all the time helps me pitch certain candidates a little bit better to my clients because I can see where they align. Like I can see where their weaknesses are, but their strengths outweigh a lot.
Yeah. That reminds me of something. I read a stat. I'll get the numbers wrong or the stats wrong, but when men apply for jobs, if they have 70 or 80% of the qualifications, they apply. And women, if they don't have 100, they don't apply. I'm interested from a recruiter's perspective, if you've seen that and then how you've coached your female athletes through the process because they don't need it. Obviously you can't we're not all unicorns, right? So
Yeah.
you got any interesting thoughts or stories on that front?
So what's funny is when I talk to any individual, male or female, that views what I'm calling them about as something they would never have thought of because they're not qualified, I actually have to explain to them what I saw. This is what I see from the job function that you have listed on your LinkedIn or you have listed on your resume, and why I think you would be so great at this. And this would be the next step in your career. And it's interesting. I have to pitch them more often than not because I want people to realize that be so unapologetically braggadocious about what you've done in your career. Let's take it to that next level. And I have to really pump them up to see that within themselves.
Yep. No, that is a great reminder. One of the best individuals that I ever hired. I'll never forget this. I was in Iowa and I was trying to hire a bunch of drug reps. I worked for J&J at the time. And I met this individual. He struggled with pronunciation of the drugs and all of that. And I was very fortunate to have a recruiter that was helping me. And Craig Pearson is his name. Dan Farrow is the gentleman that I hired. He's still a rock star in pharma. But Craig Pearson was my recruiter, and he walked me through exactly what you just did. He walked me through. He said, "So Brian, look at this. Dan is a helicopter pilot. You can't be dumb and learn military flying operations. Okay. So it may be that he's an experiential learner. He's going to have to walk himself through it." And then he took me through all these 3 or 4 other traits. And this was 30 years ago. And I can still remember the conversation like it was yesterday. And it led me to Craig's coaching, led me to hiring Dan, and the rest is history. Dan's had a phenomenal career in pharma, and I probably would have passed had I not had Craig on my right shoulder coaching me, that he literally had the skills that were transferable to get into the position that I was trying to hire for. So I'm with you 100%.
Yeah, I wish more people had that flexibility and mindset to just being more open. And when you see a resume, I'll be very transparent. I never look at anybody's resume until after I've talked to them because I want to know what's not on that resume. And I
Yeah.
think that ultimately is how you find those secret skill sets that they just are like, oh, I didn't really think that was important. That was incredibly. Let's add
Yeah.
that. Let's add that right now. Yes.
Yeah. There's latent genius that is totally hidden on their resume.
And I tell people this, and this will be another nugget to share for anyone that's listening. Write down what you do every quarter. Write it down. Type it up somewhere. Save it somewhere because you just never know. You'll forget, and your bosses will too. And when you're coming up to your reviews, just have all that stuff. Be unapologetic. You've worked hard.
Okay, we could talk all day, but you're busy, and our listeners have short attention. So I'm gonna wrap it up with one more question,
Sure.
and that is, I want to give you the final word on how hard you've worked and how proud you must be to be the leader of 2 companies, but also the leader of children. You're taking control of their education. Maybe just speak to like your pride on both sides and what you're most proud of on both sides, your job profession and then your real profession of teaching your children.
Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand. So on the professional side, I love that we have been able to help build teams and coach them on all steps of the process. So whether as we come to this recruiting, really getting people to trust us on joining the parking industry and what that means. But once they join your company, then what? What does our training process look like? What does our internal processes look like? So a lot of what I love to do is I tell my clients, do a big bunch of hiring, a big group of people, then stop. Onboard them, truly train them in the manner in which you would hope that you were trained if you were in their position, because that's what's going to set them up for success. And that goes right back to like my family. I'm truly training them and really I'm raising adults, right?
Yeah.
And so any bit of investment that I can put here is going to pay dividends in the long run in the same manner in which when you hire someone, you train them and you onboard them. That's my biggest success and power and that I'm so proud of is that I have been able and trusted enough to be able to build out these teams and help them through the process to make sure that these employees are happy, excited, motivated, and they're true brand ambassadors for you guys.
Yeah. Wow. So you do not sound like a normal recruiter, because my experience with recruiters has been once the ink is dry, they're on to the next thing. And it sounds like that's not what you do. And obviously that's why you've probably had the success that you've had.
Yeah.
So congratulations for that.
Thank you. Yeah. Every parking client I've signed on has been my client since inception. So I stick with them. I stick with the brand and we just rock and roll.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Again, thank you for your time. Congratulations on your success. It sounds like you have a lot of fun with your kids during the day or the 2 days that you have them. And obviously throughout the rest of the week. And I love the rationale for I could get them back at 5 o'clock and they're tired and hungry and it's not the best part of them. So I get to see the best part of them while they're in school as well. So that's, my hat is off to you. I'm a little jealous, but my kids are well beyond me helping them, at least from a school perspective. So that's great. Celeste, thank you for joining us here on Harder Than It Looks. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully at the next show. Then I'll make it a point. We'll meet for real.
Yes, meet in person. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun.
Okay, that's a wrap on this episode of Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, presented by Parker Technology. Please leave us a review if you liked what you heard. Make sure you tune in next month as we continue to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. Bye for now.